The Federal Reserve held steady on rates for a second straight time at the conclusion of its November meeting and kept the federal funds target rate at 5.25% to 5.5%. Fed Chair Jerome Powell offered additional insight into policymakers' latest decision and shared his thoughts on how the central bank may proceed in December. Federal Reserve Chair Powell said the strength of consumer and small businesses' finances may have been underestimated, as spending remains strong. We may have underestimated the balance sheet strength of households and small businesses, and that may be part of it, he said during the press conference. While he said the country will eventually see pre-pandemic savings levels, that point may not be here yet. The major averages turned sharply higher after 3 p.m. as traders took an upbeat read off of the Federal Reserve's latest decision. At 3:09 p.m. Eastern Time, the S&P 500 was up by about 1%, while the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 0.7%. The Nasdaq Composite was the outperformer of the three indexes, up 1.3%. The sharp run-up in Treasury yields is not causing the Fed to change its approach to reducing the size of its bond holdings. Chair Jerome Powell said Wednesday that the central bank's move to allow up to $95 billion a month in Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities to roll off each month hasn't been anything more than a small factor in the yield rise. The committee is not considering changing the pace of its balance sheet runoff. It's not something we're talking about considering, he said. Despite a resilient economy as the Federal Reserve has tightened monetary policy, Chair Jerome Powell says taming inflation will most likely require a slowdown in growth and dampening in the labor market. I still believe, and my colleagues for the most part still believe, that it is likely to be true, that we will need to see some slower growth and some softening in the labor market to fully restore price stability, Powell said. Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell said the central bank hasn't made any decisions yet for its December meeting, and even if it chooses to pause rates for the third consecutive meeting, that doesn't mean it would be more difficult for it to start raising rates again. The idea that it would be difficult to raise again after stopping for a meeting or two is just not right, Powell said. The committee will always do what it thinks is appropriate at the time. Fed Chair Powell stressed that the central bank hasn't begun considering a rate cut, and it won't until inflation is brought under control. The fact is the committee is not thinking about rate cuts right now at all. We're not talking about rate cuts, Powell said. We're still very focused on the first question, which is, have we achieved a stance of monetary policy that's sufficiently restrictive to bring inflation down to 2% over time, sustainably? That is the question we're focusing on.